Hey guys, welcome to the channel. The video I'm going to show you today is my hummingbird. If you are a newer painter like me, follow along. We'll learn together, talk about the process, things I would do differently, and things that I think went well. You can kind of see in my time lapses how I go about painting. Feel free to comment things that you found work well for you or ask questions, and I'm happy to respond and let you know things that I did. Maybe if I didn't touch on something in a video, I'm happy to explain further or give you any insight into my process or things that I used with materials. So this is what I would call my main details phase of my project. As you could see in my prior video, I already did my blocking in and my background for the hummingbird. Now I'm going in and laying down the foundational details that are going to build my form and my shape. This is what's going to tell us specifically what's happening with these feathers, what color are they, do they lay over or under each other, as well as the value. So where is my light and where is my shadow? I am using water soluble oil paint from Winsor & Newton, and I'm using their water soluble painting medium. I'm using my laptop for my reference photo in the back. You'll see it sporadically changing screen. I'm just zooming in, trying to look at different details, getting a good idea of how the color changes from feather to feather. The light source for this photo is actually coming from, I guess you would say, the top right of the picture. So up behind the hummingbird. The back feathers are very lit, and the top of the beak is one of the highest highlights. And then the light kind of streams down and around the shoulder. So when I get into the feather details later in this video, you'll see kind of a band of lighter, kind of white highlights in the feathers. It comes across the shoulder, almost like a sleeve. And that's just from that backlit lighting. Here in the video, you can see I have my bright bristle brush, and I'm just laying down some foundational feather markings, and I'm actually experimenting here. I'm trying to see if I like this bristle brush for these marks and how it's looking on my bird. The complexity of the feathers was definitely a challenge. I knew that this was going to be a difficult painting, especially as a newer painter, but I was excited for the challenge. I wanted to see how well I could convey hummingbird feathers without trying to make every single detail realistic. I needed a generalized feather pattern that would elicit the type of hummingbird feathers that I needed without sitting there and trying to put in each little feather. I'm just using a really small brush here, trying to get some more depth into my shadows and my lights, adding a little bit of texture throughout the bird with little details here. There's some reflective light on the feathers that is reflecting that bright blue sky. I'm softening the tail. It's sitting behind the hummingbird. Since we're looking at the hummingbird straight on, I really wanted it to appear softer, almost like a more blended appearance. I don't want the tail to be too prominent in comparison to the front chest and the eye head region of the hummingbird. Just absolutely loved working with so many blues and greens in this hummingbird. It was just such beautiful coloring. Okay, so I had already put a little base feathering in here. Just using the very tip of my filbert brush, I'd started making little drags, just little kind of soft lines, starting pretty close together and varying the colors between kind of blues and greens. The coloring on this hummingbird is very shiny, vibrant, and I wanted to be able to have a large range of colors kind of popping through these feathers. So the base, I wanted to make sure I wasn't just sticking too much to one color. I'm going pretty loose here. I'm not following a very strict pattern, but you can see I'm trying to make almost scalloped shaped groupings of feathers. That's pretty true to the hummingbird. It has, if you zoom in on a hummingbird's feathers, the feathers looked pretty scalloped and layered. They're very beautiful, but very hard to do unless you're going to sit there and meticulously do each line of the feathers. So I'm trying to make groupings that appear intentionally placed together, but also varying in location and size and color. Adding in these in different colors, lengths, shapes is going to add texture and create a lot of movement in my painting and hopefully not create any kind of, I don't know, eyesore lines. I don't want anything to be too symmetrical to where your eye is just going to get stuck on it right away. I want it to look really blended and natural when it's all done. If you wanted to try to make the feathers very realistic, you'd probably be best off making a grid pattern on your hummingbird to follow. It's really difficult to do the realistic pattern just right out of the gate. I wasn't going for that, but if you were, I would recommend drawing in some kind of grid pattern to follow so you can know exactly kind of where to place your lines and your feathers. As you can see, I'm using my bright again, really trying to make some crisp lines. And I'm trying to vary the colors to add that depth and texture like I talked about. I think this bright worked relatively well for the project. However, I think I would have liked to have a smaller size bright as well for some of these smaller areas. I felt like my supplies were a little limited. Um, so moving forward, I would like to have a few more options on hand. Now, in this part of the video, you can see I'm trying to refine the eye. In my first video with the blocking in phase, I actually completely deleted the eye. I realized that it was a little bit too low in reference to the beak and I needed it to be moved down a bit. So I ended up just blocking over the eye completely. I tried to make a little bit of a marking in the paint just so that I could get a gauge of where I wanted the main, like the pupil to be. And so now I'm just kind of trying to draw it in and give it a little bit of shape so you can see where the curvature is of the eye, where light is reflecting, and the eyelid around it. At this point, I'm feeling really happy with my hummingbird so far, but there is still a lot of work to do. Now, if you notice the lighting or the angle changes in my camera point of view, it's because this took me multiple days to complete, and I'm only working on it maybe max like an hour and a half at a time. This is at night after my kids are in bed. So I'm kind of compiling a lot of different video footage into one to try to show you a streamlined view of the entire process from post blocking in phase to as close to completion as possible. I didn't glaze in this. I've actually never glazed a painting before. I do plan on adding some glaze to this. But I just wanted to show you guys the main project up until almost the very end. I'm just going through and adding a little bit more textured feathers throughout the bird's body, popping color here and there, trying to add fullness and form. This probably wasn't super necessary, but it was bothering me. I noticed that the white on the back of the eye, that white streak was just a little bit too high. I wanted to bring it down a little bit. So I just moved some of that green kind of color with some of those upper eyelid feathers. I brought those down a bit and then started building in the white underneath just to move it down a little bit. That suited the reference photo much more closely than how it was originally. So now I am adding in the little white tips to all of the feathers. Um, I shouldn't say all. There's primarily a lot that are noticeable on the top of the head and under the beak. These are also part of the focal point that I am really trying to hit, so I want to make sure that I get all of these done. I was really nervous to start this part of the painting. This is a lot of very fine detail. I'm using my script liner brush and I'm just trying to make these little dabs to elicit the tips of the feathers. I'm not using my whitest white here. At the very end, I will go and do some extra highlights in these, make them a little bit more white with my titanium white. But I am trying to really get some form going here with these feathers. So you can see individual feathers, not just a bunch of color. I think the number one thing I would recommend during this step in the process is just using a good amount of medium to make your paint really, really mobile. The smoother your paint, the easier it is to get these little lines on there without it kind of clumping or smudging or dragging. This was a very arduous part of the journey, but it was well worth it in the end. So, this is quite a big jump forward, but my phone had died during filming. So, I went ahead and just continued on with the tree after I was able to charge my phone for a little bit. As you can see, I did add a lot more of that white detail throughout the entire body of the hummingbird, just continued the same process I was using before and just added little details here or there to add texture to those feathers. And now I am just trying to add in some depth and color to this tree. I thought, the hummingbird has a lot of cool tones and cool colors, and the sky is also just this like really light blue gray. I wanted to warm it up with this tree. I wanted this tree to really show its warm colors. And in the reference photo, there are warm colors in this tree, but I kind of wanted to push that a little bit further to complement the cool tones of the bird. I'm not trying to make the tree or the branch look super realistic, but I want it to look realistic enough that it looks appropriate with the hummingbird. I want it to look natural with the hummingbird, but not a focal point of the hummingbird. The hummingbird has a lot of detail. I want the tree to have just enough detail to where you can see what it is, that it has form, that it has some reflective light, but I don't need it to have every little crevice of the bark showing. I don't need every little shadow to be there. I just want it to be a generalized understanding of the branch and its form. So my painting now is upside down, and there's a reason for that. I felt like I couldn't get some of these little details added in on this side in the angle I needed while it was still wet and drying. So I just decided to flip it. So there's a little bit of time here where I have my painting upside down and I'm trying to get some of these little tips done of these feathers. The beak is actually one of the brightest points on this bird. The sun really hits this beak pretty strongly, and it has one of the strongest highlights in the whole painting on the top of the beak because that sun again is coming down from the top right of the picture. So it's reflecting off the top of that beak. So it's actually pretty high chroma orange, but I didn't want it to be too overwhelming on the bird. So I just tried to keep it pretty equal in comparison to the chroma of the bird, just obviously a different color. But then that is going to be the highest highlight that I have is going to be right on top of that beak. Just blending it in with a dry, clean brush so it has a smooth appearance. Since I had a nice light white on my brush, I really wanted to just go in and get this reflective sheen on the eye. So I figured I would just go ahead and get that done. So the next day, I continued on with some of these fine finishing details. So I started with some of the paint that I already had on my palette from the day before and wanted to touch up some of the parts of this tree branch. Just adding in some better shadowing and some more deeper textures within the branch itself, adding a little bit more variation of colors. Now I'm going in and hitting these little white tips on these feathers with a more pure titanium white. It's not 100% pure titanium white. There is a little bit of blue in there, but it's much, in person at least, it is much more noticeable than what was already there before. So I'm just getting on these highlights. I'm trying to add a little texture on the edge of the bird to show the feathers have some volume. I don't want the head of the hummingbird to be too flat and rounded, too smooth. These feathers kind of lift off of the body, especially when they catch some wind. So I'm trying to show that they have some lift to them. They're light, they're fluffy, they are mobile. So I'm trying to add a little bit of texture just right on the edges. So I would still consider this a highlight, at least it is for me, but it's not titanium white. I'm going in with a really bright green blue, just trying to elicit like a brighter vibrancy to the tips of these feathers. In my reference photo, it's not white. It doesn't appear to be white. It appears to be just a very vibrant, almost like metallic-y, shiny blue. So I'm just trying to show a variation in the colors to add a bit of texture and depth to these feathers. All right, thanks for watching, everyone. Again, if you like this video, like and subscribe, follow for more. And if you have any feedback, feel free to leave that in the comments below. Have a good one.